afternoon, everyone, and I'm so happy that you could all come today. We're going to start off with my mom coming up here and again offering her welcome to you.
Jai Jinendra and Namaste. In the past 3 months and 7 days, I have received many calls, many emails, and many letters, and I have not been able to respond each and every one. But I have not forgotten all the messages, all the warmth and love you gave me. I have not forgotten. All the messages are engraved in my heart. And it's hard to say something right now. I wish everything happened so suddenly, so I find it very difficult to believe it. And whether you believe it or not, my eyes are right now still looking among all of you. And I think that I'm going to find him somewhere, that he's talking to somebody. And I hope among all of us, since we are searching for him, we will find him. I'm grateful that all of you are here. I feel the warmth I received from all of you, and I have received all the hugs from you. That's why I could stand in front of you, and I thank you for that. Thanks.
So, you know, we've started on a solemn note, a prayer, and my mom's very moving words. But, you know, all of us here are a blend of many cultures, and we're a blend of many traditions. And what we're going to do today is different. It's a blend. So there are spiritual elements, there are prayerful elements, but there should be funny elements too. This is a celebration. So you are allowed to laugh. You're allowed to cry. You're not allowed to fall asleep. So I'm Sagar, the oldest son, so I have the honor of being up here today. And I'm going to just serve as your guide to what we're going to do this afternoon. This is our agenda. We have just started the welcome. We're going to have the grandchildren generation delivering some reflections and comments about their experiences with Dad, with Bapuji. And then we're going to have a somewhat longer session, about half an hour, with some pictures and a few video clips. And I think that'll be hopefully quite entertaining, because there's a story about my dad that, you know, you'll know him well from some aspects, but there is a larger story, and that's the story that we wish to convey. After that, I've actually put my sister down because I always put her so high on the pedestal. But we'll actually go to our dear friends who have come today to be able to speak, Professor Chandrakant Shah, Bhuti Auntie, as well as Bhadra Auntie, and we will hopefully close with Dr. Tushar Mehta. We'll then continue with our family stories and issues, and we'll have both sisters, or both daughters, I should say, speaking, and then we'll return to a more solemn phase with a more formal prayer. But because this is a celebration, and because it's our family tradition to be sort of into music and into song, we're going to actually end today with a very bright, fast-paced song, and you're allowed to disco dance during that. Finally, we'll have some refreshments and snacks after that. So with that, we're going to start off with the next generation, the generation of grandchildren. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So at this point, I'll invite Kiran to come forward.
Hello, thank you all for coming. I'm Kiran, and Bapuji is my dad's dad, so that's why I called him Bapuji. So for most of my life, Bapuji lived about 30 minutes away from my house, so I was really lucky to be able to spend lots and lots and lots of time with them while I was growing up. And naturally, spending lots of time with Bapuji, he and I had lots of philosophical discussions, and I got to hear so many of his really classic stories. So when I was thinking about what I was going to talk about today, I was trying to find some single piece of advice or a story that he told me that really resonated with me that I could share with all of you. But when I was doing this reflection, trying to find this story, what I realized about him was that the thing that I found so inspiring, the thing that I think was the most inspiring, was not actually something that he explicitly told me. Rather, the most inspiring thing about him was the example that he set and lived out every day of courage and determination and perseverance. And it was this example that was really illustrated in a lot of the classic Bapuji stories that he would always tell. So, Bapuji, of course, came to Canada in the early 1960s when there were very few Indians here in Canada. There was no internet. It's hard to imagine. And there was little information about Canada available in India. So he told us that one of the first ideas that he got of what Canada would be like was from this movie he saw in a theater in Pune. And so this movie, what it involved was there were these two thieves riding on a train somewhere in Canada in the middle of winter. And to avoid being captured by the police, they had to jump off the train. So this film, it shows these two guys getting on the top of the train, and then they jump off the train into the snow, and they're buried in snow right up to their necks. So Bapuji's sitting in the theater, and instead of being deterred from his upcoming voyage to what must have appeared in that moment to be this crazy frozen tundra, why would anybody go there? He was still determined to come and do his PhD. So what he did was he bought this huge winter jacket that went all the way from his neck down to his ankles so that he would be ready to brave the snow when he arrived. This jacket ultimately proved not to be the right thing to wear when he arrived in Canada in humid August. But for me, what this story illustrates is that determination that Bapuji had to accomplish his goals and the never-ending courage that he displayed in moving to Canada, in raising his family here, in reconciling Eastern and Western cultures, in literally braving the snow in Canadian winter, and truly in everything that he set out to accomplish. So, in addition to the sheer awe that I have for this courage and determination and perseverance that enabled my own existence, what I take from Bapuji's example and what I hope that my generation will take from his example is this. Whatever our goals may be, to accomplish them, we must be prepared to brave the snow.
Thank you, Kiran. And now, Anjali and Anisha.
Good afternoon. So for those of you who I haven't yet had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Amisha.
And I'm Anjali. Since we grew up on the other side of the country from our grandparents, going to visit Ba and Bapuji was always a special time for us as kids. Having chai with the neighbors, eating warm samosas and endless mango pulp, coming to Brampton always felt like visiting a little piece of India.
Even when it was minus 30 degrees outside. So we'd spend hours swimming in the condo pool with our grandparents, feeding the ducks and squirrels in the park next door, and stuffing our tiny faces with puran puri. Even as we got older and playing in the playground became shopping at the Bramalea Mall, and craft projects became homework assignments, we never outgrew one thing, and that was Bapuji's stories.
Whether he was sharing a fond memory from the 50s, a helpful bit of chemistry knowledge, a slightly off-topic anecdote, or a valuable life lesson, we could always count on Bapuji's stories to entertain, educate, and humble us.
So he loved to talk about his time as a professor, writing complex chemistry textbooks and navigating the academic world in a time where it wasn't necessarily common to speak more than one language or consider diverse perspectives. And one time, after I had taken a particularly difficult exam, Bapuji shared some advice that he used to tell his students. If the test was hard, he'd said to me with a little grin, "You just didn't study hard enough." While I don't think this is always true, Bapuji certainly instilled in us the value of hard work and taught us never to take our education for granted.
One time, he told us about the time that he joined the Indian Air Force. He was one of thousands of applicants and one of very few selected, and he wanted to fly. And after a time in the program, however, he started to feel out of place and like he didn't fit in with the culture. So although he was fully capable, he left to find a path that better aligned with his values. We learned about the importance of making principled decisions and following your moral compass.
An exciting story we'd heard as kids was a special moment in Bapuji's childhood, when Gandhiji was touring his native state of Gujarat.
Only a baby at the time, our Bapuji was seated on Gandhiji's lap. We're not quite sure who inspired the other, but it's clear they both pursued lives following principles of nonviolence and peace.
Sometimes, Bapuji told tales that some might find hard to believe, like the time that he claimed a squirrel climbed all the way up to the 29th floor of their skyrise building, and so he fed it a peanut.
When I told Bapuji I had decided to go to Queen's for my undergrad, he was thrilled that we would be sharing an alma mater. He warned me, however, that I should be cautious as a vegetarian on campus. Confused, I probed for the story behind his concern. He told me that when he was first starting his PhD at Queen's, he was welcomed by the dean of the department who invited him to dine with the other colleagues. Bapuji informed the dean he was vegetarian, as it was tradition to have a big steak dinner on the first night. Unfortunately, vegetarianism was still a foreign concept in Canada, so as Bapuji peered around the table at the 8-ounce steaks being served, the server came out with an 8-ounce block of cheese for him instead. How relieved he was when I FaceTimed him after my first week at Queen's to tell him about the abundance of vegetarian options in the many, many, many cafeterias on campus.
So we always knew Bapuji was a storyteller. We were proud to tell people about the books he had written. And so it was especially inspiring to see him so fully invested in writing his latest book, The Paradise Project, translating his vision for the world into a powerful narrative.
Over the years, Bapuji made us think, laugh, and occasionally groan. We will remember Bapuji for so many things, but what will undoubtedly stay with us the most and guide us as we navigate the road ahead are Bapuji's stories, his wisdom, his humor, and his insight.
Thank you.
So I can say that I actually also saw that squirrel, so I'll verify that story. All right, Sage.
Louis Freeman is a longtime friend of the family, and unfortunately he couldn't make it today. But he wanted to say a poem, and as he couldn't make it, I will now read the poem. In the email that accompanied the poem, though, he wanted, he said he had so much admiration for Bapuji, and here's the poem. In Continuum by Alan Ziegler. Now, all the time since your death is still counted in weeks, I'll be walking along, and there, just beyond the ability of my eyes to distinguish faces, I'll see someone who looks like you. And for a few milliseconds, my brain will form your face. At first it was a little unnerving, but I've come to look forward to and treasure those milliseconds. And I'll mourn them when they're gone. Thank you.
Thank you, Sage. And I think we've seen just the full range of experiences that we've had. And perhaps this is a good time now to begin the story in some more detail. So this may be a familiar picture, you know, a happy couple, you know, glowing with pride about many things accomplished and, you know, having been together for so many years. But how did it start? Was it such an auspicious start? Well, I don't know. Look at him here. He's saying, you know, I don't have any patience for this. When is it going to be over? And my mom is taking, you know, her expression, I think, says, what did I get myself into? So this is how it began. And maybe there was an earlier part that, you know, set the stage for this kind of attraction. And it was that I think my dad was a movie star. I mean, when I see this picture, you know, I think, you know, Clark Gable or some other kind of movie actor. And boy, you know, he had a certain amount of style. And, you know, he carried it off with a variety of expressions and poses. Well, you saw the expressions of the wedding day. Did things get any better? Well, a short while later, things were better, and finally my mom was smiling. And she was looking forward to this marriage. And how did that go? Well, more than 60 years later, there they were, and my mom was running in a race, and she was being cheered on by my dad. And this was, I thought, a marvelous expression of how both of them really valued fitness, but both of them really valued supporting each other. And I think that medal that my mom is wearing really should be around the two of them. So this is a little bit of their story. But, you know, we saw the wedding ceremony picture. And here is something that I think reminds me of passport photos. And this was the beginning of their voyage to Canada. So they got married, they moved to Canada. Certain things happen, you know, when you get married. So babies appear. And I particularly like this picture from about 1965. So there's my dad, and you know, I could swear that he's holding a McDonald's French fry there, because he loved French fries. And of course, my mom is looking on contentedly. My sister Margie, who always likes to command attention, is standing up and, you know, facing the audience. And I'm just quietly smiling in the background there. And then my cousin Sunil is sitting there. And he was also a student at Queen's University at the time. So that was a glimpse of family life in the 60s. What about the 70s? So, you know, sometimes people look at different decades and they think about the styles or, you know, particularly the hairstyles, and think of the 70s or 80s as, you know, like the big hair era. I just look back and say, that was the hair era. This is a picture on a ferry near Nelson, British Columbia, where we grew up. And Margie's not in it because she took command of the camera, and so she's taking the picture. And there's my sister Rita, and of course my parents there. And my dad is continuing his movie star persona with those sunglasses. In 1970, we had the first visit of someone from India. And this was my father's older brother. And of course, some of you may recognize the young fella on the side there. That's Dilip. Some of you probably know Dilip. And in the middle is, of course, my grandmother, my father's father. So my grandmother and the oldest brother were able to come to Canada. And one of the most important things that my uncle was able to do is, when my father was 17, his father died. And they had a small family business, and my uncle was in college then. And in order to support the family, he had to drop out of college and take over the family business, and he made it a big success. And my father wondered what he should do. And the two of them sorted out that, you know what? You're smart, you're interested in college, you're interested in chemistry, carry on. And later on, he gave him advice when he was more into chemistry. You know, think about the pharmaceutical industry, think about making chemicals. You can do something for India, because India needs all kinds of industries, you know, back in the 60s and 70s. And my dad carried that theme forward in his studies, and actually he sponsored my younger brother, his younger brother, Dilip, to also come to Canada and subsequently launch a career in the pharmaceutical sciences. Well, the 70s marched on, and you know, I like to think of this as our front lawn, because I know my mom liked to garden so much. Actually, this is a garden in Vancouver. And we continued to grow up. So here is some memorable hair and fashion from the late 70s. And of course, my parents wanted to be very formal, so they had a very nice formal picture taken. And this is late 1970s. And actually, my very favorite picture from this era is this one. Again, they had left Nelson. They were now in the Vancouver area, and we were all, you know, thrilled with each other, as you can tell from Rita's expression there, and enjoying our new life there. Well, the 70s came, the 80s came, the late 80s, and the early 90s were a special time for adding to our family. And we had some new guy show up. And Margie, of course, being the pioneer, I was behind. I wasn't anywhere close to getting married, but Margie took the plunge, and we were glad to be able to welcome Lon to our family. The years marched by, and Bapuji's activities varied. One of the first things he did when he came to Canada in the 60s was to indulge in camping, and he continued that tradition right until a couple of years ago. And this particular picture was taken about 15 years ago, as the two of them went off on a major camping expedition. One of the places that Bapuji liked the most, though, was in Brampton, and that was, he was so fond of the view from the penthouse apartment and the penthouse condo on Lisa Street in Brampton. And you know, it really was an unforgettable view, and this is one of the places that he was the happiest. And that's, I think, the place where almost all of you have been to, and many of you, I understand, as a, you know, now a serious guy, you spent many hours after midnight playing cards there. Shame on you. A few years passed, and we had a picture taken actually in our backyard in Toronto at the time. And you know, except for Peter, who's taking the picture, all the 3 children and 7 of the 8 grandchildren are in this picture. 1 grandchild was still to magically appear. And the years go on, and if you look at, I don't have a pointer here, but you look at a couple of the cuties here, and you know, they got a little older, and you know, things happen to them too. And this includes graduation and many happy times as the years march on. Just a few years ago, my parents were able to come down to the United States where I had taken a new job, and it was a thrill to be with them and showing them around. And in the last couple of years, my dad really enjoyed a number of different reunions and visits from friends. This was a family reunion in 2015. This was another part of a family reunion with his youngest brother, Ranjit Kaka, in India. And then here he is, sandwiched between 2 of his brothers, his immediately next oldest brother and the youngest brother are there today. So that is him as a family man. But I want to tell you a little bit of a story of him as a revolutionary, as a reformer. He had a poster that he had hanging in his lap. I couldn't find a picture of that actual poster, but I found something similar on the internet. So I'm going to show you this. It's the same quote, it's a slightly different graphic. This quote says, "Philosophers have sought to understand the world. The point, however, is to change it." Now, he blacked out the bottom part, which said Karl Marx. He didn't want anyone to think of him as a Marxist. He just liked this, and he related to it as a scientist. So how did his science career begin? Well, this is where it began. He was hired as an instructor at SB College in Pune. And he was very excited. He had his master's degree. He was going to be teaching. And then guess what he found? He looked at the books. They were teaching things that were 20 to 30 years old. And he said, this is it. I'm ready to quit. There's no hope in academia. And so he talked to his department head and the principal of the college, and they said, calm down. Don't quit. Change something. So he said, okay, I'll write a book. And this was his first book, Elements of Chemistry. You can't see the white, the chemistry there too clearly. In 1958, at the age of 28, not even an assistant professor, not even a PhD, a lecturer, and he's published his first book. Other courses needed material too. 1959, his second book. If there's something wrong, do something about it. In his case, as an academic, he wrote books. He then realized that he needed to go beyond the boundaries of his local college and get a PhD and come to Canada. So he decided, he applied to a number of universities, picked Queen's University, and this is where he ended up spending a lot of his time. This is the chemistry building at Queen's University in Kingston, where he was to spend about 4 years. But here comes another story. Here is this guy, you know, he's a chemistry graduate student. What does he do? He joins as a guy, you know, essentially fresh off the boat. He joins the Graduate Student Association, and he works with them. He becomes editor of the main newspaper for graduate students at Queen's University, and he writes an editorial. It says the educational crisis. And the crisis of that time, in the early 60s, is that the universities really needed to expand, and there were all sorts of growing pains. So he prescribed some formulas for how the country could progress in this. To me, it's astonishing that a chemistry student from India would, you know, have the vision and the courage to write in another language and, you know, advise professors and chairmen and politicians about how to reform the educational system. After completing his PhD, he moved, and we moved, to Nelson, British Columbia. There was a small university there, and he was a happy member of the faculty. Here is just a picture of some of his colleagues, and this picture would have been from about 1969 or so. But he found that he wasn't happy with the textbooks again. There was a new field called spectroscopy. There was a new field within chemistry. So what do you think an academic does? An academic like Bapuji? He writes a book. This book became a standard textbook, and I actually had the privilege of using this about 5 years later at Columbia University in New York, where it was also one of the standard textbooks in the field. After our time in Nelson, my parents moved to the Vancouver area, and for several years, Bapuji was at the British Columbia Institute of Technology as a special advisor working directly with the Minister of Education, Pat McGeer. And one of the special missions at that time was to say, how do we transform basic science knowledge into jobs, into industries, and so on? And my dad had earlier been interested in the pharmaceutical industry. He had helped and done some consulting work in that area. So he came up with an idea, which now we've all heard about, but was revolutionary at the time. And that is the concept of a discovery park. And basically what this was a dedicated area close to a university which had special facilities for new startup companies to begin, and all kinds of other supports, financial and intellectual, to allow newer graduates and some professors and so on to launch new businesses. So again, transforming science through industry. He didn't confine himself to just science though. This is an actual headline from not the New York Times, I'm sorry to say, but the Nelson Daily News. Dad wanted to change how the educational system in our community worked. So he ran as a trustee for the school board. He decided to get more involved at various levels in the community through community organizations. For many years he worked with United Way, but the lure of academia often brought him back. He was invited as a visiting professor to Uruguay, and there was a newspaper article about how he advised the government of Uruguay to reform their chemistry standards. He blended academia and community work, doing more community work in Toronto with the United Way of Greater Toronto, and participating in special celebrations and peace runs, and that's Roy Thompson Hall in the background there, to just demonstrate how interested he was in spreading the message and making change. His final major academic consulting work was a one-year visiting professorship in India, and that was at Shivaji University in Kolhapur. And there, he met and taught someone who eventually became vice chancellor of another Indian university, and who ultimately invited him to come and give a commencement address, which you'll be seeing a little bit of later. After his formal retirement from the chemistry part of his life, he became much more interested in Jainism. Now, he had been curious about Jain philosophy and its deep teachings about, what is matter and how is the universe created, and he found many parallels. He did that earlier in his life. Later in his life, he wanted to understand the philosophy, and more importantly, he wanted to find out what principles of Jainism have relevance to our modern world, number one, and how can we spread the message of Jainism to a broader community. So we're going to see a video here, and I'll just see if the volume is right, but here we go.
Welcome back. There are about 5 million followers of the Jain religion around the world. Most live in India. In Canada, there are only a couple of thousand, and one of them is on a quest to make Jainism better known and better understood.
It's just a small just a small clip from 3 different television shows that he did on Jainism. He wrote a book that he was very proud to see, was very prominently reviewed in the Toronto Star. And I thought I would share with you another clip from another television show about his interest in Jainism and spreading the message.
For Vastupal, coming to the temple is a social occasion. Jain's philosophy appeals to him more than rituals. And he worries that if people only focus on the ritual, they could forget the reason behind it.
It was that ideal of what are the fundamental principles and how do they apply to the modern world that made him write his next book, Jainism and the New Spirituality. And that reminds me, we have a couple of his books, we have editions in the back. They are there for you to take with you today. 1, both, take 5 if you wish. But they are his gift to the world, and if you don't have a copy, please help yourself to one now. So, I mentioned that he was in 3 different television shows, so let me give you a 3rd version of that.
Hello, I'm Carolyn Weaver and welcome to the Voices of Religion. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Dr. Vastupal Parikh, who has written a terrific book about a religion I have just learned about called Jainism and the New Spirituality. So I want to thank you very much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
One of the things that I love about doing the different series that I do is how much I get to learn. Jainism, when it was first sort of proposed that we would do a show on this, I said, I've never even heard of this. Is this a new religion? Is this? And it's not. It's a very old religion. So first of all, give us a sense of how old this religion is.
Well, in India, history is rarely recorded, and therefore all we can say is the ancient past, you know. But the latest revival of this religion, or reform of this religion, was about 2,600 years ago.
So it's been around.
By the 24th guru of the religion, his name is Mahavira, and he was about 60 years senior to Buddha.
Yes, now I
His teaching about Jainism took many forms: writing books, writing articles, radio interviews, television shows. He could run up to a group of people quietly having a picnic and get them to sit around and listen to a lecture on Jainism. Well, not really, but he liked lecturing outdoors and indoors. And one of his examples of his dedication to Jainism was to live a Jain life, not just preach it. So he spent many visits in India, in rural India, at particular Jain facilities where he both did extensive volunteer work and did work in speaking and learning and ultimately writing some of his other books. So this was at Virayat in Bihar, in India. Well, I mentioned he, of course, was true an academic. And, you know, as an academic, he was very proud of his books. And, you know, I have to hand it to him. There are 6 books and some other editions there. So 6 books, 3 chemistry, 3 books that are, you know, about philosophy and Jainism and spirituality. And one of the things that still humbles me is when I think of him, you know, as one of 12 children. We have approximately, or I have approximately 100 first cousins. And when we think of all the people, both of his generation, his brothers and sisters, his nieces and nephews, and now the grandchildren, no one comes close to his output. You know, Dad was a competitive guy, and one of the nice things he always liked to remind me of is, you know, I've only managed 3 books. He managed 6 books. He also won the award for the most degrees in the family. Most of us have 1 or 2 degrees. A couple of us have 3 degrees, but Dad had 4 degrees. Okay? A bachelor, 2 masters, and a PhD. So he wins. One of his proudest achievements was something that he struggled with just in the past year, and that was his latest book, which just came out a few months ago, The Paradise Project. And in that book, he tried to distill a lot of the elements of spirituality, of ethical values, of how to save this planet by proper application of these values. And he particularly identified a way in which an average individual could not only practice this, but engage with NGOs, charities and other organizations to achieve these ends. I'm going to now close with a lecture. This is a lecture that my father was invited to present as the commencement speaker at a university, an open university with a different kind of concept in India. This is a university whose president, in India they call it vice chancellor, was Dad's student when he was a visiting professor in India in 1976. And that individual never forgot the lesson and the encouragement that he got from my dad. And so he went on to have a stellar academic career and pioneered a number of educational reforms within India. And 2 years ago, my father was able to travel to India to be the commencement speaker. Now, the full commencement speech is, it's on YouTube. It's about 30 minutes, but I'm going to share about 5 minutes with you. And I think, who better to tell you about him and his values and his aspirations than he himself.
So, my friends, environmental destruction and human tragedy, this is the unfortunate backdrop to your entry into real life. It is really the scary time, but I do not mean to scare you. In fact, at a time like this, my purpose is to alert and embolden you and inspire you to be proactive to save our planet and humanity. I must admit, my friends, that at a time like this, your challenges are greater than ones I faced. Your choice now is less between comfort and idealism. That was what I was facing, whether I should choose comfort or idealistic path. That was my choice, but your choice now is more likely between survival and self-destruction. Our planet has come to that level. Confronted by these two choices, which really means no choice, because both are the facts right now. There is no choice for you but to choose survival. And the way to survive is to be proactive. Your mission now is to rescue our planet, uplift the poor, and bring sanity to this crazy world infected by violence against humanity. And here is where I have hope. There is still an opportunity to change this grim situation. There are really many prudent, visionary and wise men and women among us. They are already engaged in the acts of rescuing our planet and its very inhabitants. Literally thousands of non-governmental organizations, NGOs, have sprung all over the world to rescue us. Many of them have focused on education. They recognize that unless people are educated, unless there is a mass education, people will not have the tools to make the changes that are so badly needed at this time. This beloved university of yours, this Yashwantrao Chavan University, is itself a visionary effort to bring about that better tomorrow for all of us. Reflecting the meeting I had with Yashwantrao ji, that warm evening 55 years ago, I can recall that he was determined to uplift the masses, including the poor and dispossessed. This university, now your alma mater, because you are already graduated, now your alma mater is the result of his vision. You, as a Yashwantrao Savan University graduates, you are now responsible for promoting that vision, restoring sanity in this world. The degree you have received is really the certificate of our confidence in your ability to uplift humanity. That is a big ask, but I am confident that your education here has enabled you to share Yashwantraoji's vision. After all, what is education? It is learning and understanding books and facts for sure, and be trained to be professionals along the career path also. But I am hoping that we have gained something equally important. You have gained an ability, and I will repeat that sentence. You have gained an ability to understand, embrace, and champion human values. You are the vehicles of change because you have absorbed the skill of human understanding and championing human values. Your education has also been about empowerment, about empowering yourself to recognize that you, each one of you, are the agents of change that the world needs. And it is the combination of your technical or professional skills and your ability to place human values at the center of your life and goals that will lead to happiness and success. Therefore, my friends, I advise all of you, my graduate friends, my young friends, I advise all of you that regardless of which career you might choose, always be in touch with your free spirit, your conscience, your heart, and be guided by it all along your life. Following your free spirit may not make you rich, and I'm warning you, following your free spirit may not make you rich, but certainly it will enrich your life. As a graduate of YCMOU, you are idealistic, energetic, eager and passionate. You are an incredible force. Use that force to touch and transform other people's lives and your community. You can do it. I feel it in the energy I see here today. You can touch and transform other people's lives. You may hope you can save the planet and reshape the humanity. My dear graduates, I congratulate all of you today and wish you a very good life. And may that life be a life that is enriched and filled with the joy of being true to your conscience. We are counting on you. Thank you very much. Jai Hind.
Thank you, Dad, for that inspiration and that call to action. So we have finished the slideshow, and now we're ready to progress to have some of our distinguished speakers, our guests, to come up. So, Dr. Shah, you're able to come?
and Parikh family, and community leaders and friends. I'm deeply honored to speak at the celebration of life of my beloved friend, late Dr. Vastupal Parikh. I distinctly remember meeting him at someone's wedding almost 17 years ago. This was an Indian wedding. Indian weddings are very chaotic. And the priest was shouting slokas and doing rituals, which didn't appeal to me and many others like me, and including Vastupal Parikh too. So we left the hall, and somebody, I did not know him at that time, and someone, our common friend was there, and said, oh, by the way, do you know each other? And that's how we got introduced to each other. And within a few minutes, I realized that I have found my kindred spirit. Only within a few minutes. And that marked the beginning of our friendship, really, about 17, 15 years ago. I can go on and on about a lot of times we had together, but due to time restraint, I want to focus on his legacy as a Jain scholar and a teacher of Jainism. The majority of us, whether we are Hindu, Muslim, Christian, Jain, we are born in our religion really. Not necessarily we know all about it. We know a little bit up through our parents, we know through a little bit going to the temples or mosque or the churches, and we get some inculcation from also from our priest, a little bit and so forth. But most of them read real scriptures and digest what is to be a Jain or Hindu or Christian or so forth. What are the real principles within it? And most of us are much more what I call ritualistic religion. So we know what to do on certain days, or how to do certain prayer, or how to do certain ritual, but beyond that, really, we are much more ritualistic. And whereas he had this great ability, Dr. Parikh had a great ability to what we call in modern day the ability of knowledge translation, quote unquote knowledge translation, and knowledge mobilization. These are the buzzword in academic community all over in the Western countries. And what does knowledge translation and knowledge mobilization means? All of this pensive him is that he was able to write in a very lucid, commonly understood style for an average person. So he would be able to translate, take out the jargon, and make it easy. When I read his first book on Jainism and the new spirituality, at the age of 66 years, I'm an old man now, and I learned the fundamental principles of Jainism at that time, which as a Jain I was not fully aware of, and I always called myself a literate man. And I realized how illiterate I was till I read his book, really. He was also able to relate this principle to modern world and how it can solve its problem of war, distress, stress, environmental degradation, oppression, by promoting, and he had a great ideas of promoting social justice and equity, women's rights. He even talks about in his book on Jainism and how women were uplifted or women were made a prominent place in Jainism by even Mahavir, way back 2,500 years ago. So it was very, 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 he could translate that thing, and a peaceful coexistence. In his subsequent book, Walk With Me, the story of Mahavir and the Paradise Project, he goes beyond his own usual style of explanation and uses a technique of conversation between individuals with question and answer. So it becomes an interesting style, which you don't see much often, really. And these two books were fascinating in that area, that he kind of talks as if some ordinary people are talking and trying to convey the ideas he had and what he wanted to convey his message really. His aim was always allow individuals to find inner peace, social connectedness, and respect for environment. These are three basic things comes through him again and again, which would make a better society, full of social cohesion. Social cohesion all mean really, it's again we academic like to use a fancy terminology or so forth, but it makes community. You know, we get together, we develop things, we enjoy, we support each other, we have a social institutions like mandir, temples, and we support each other in essence really. So which would make a better society full of social cohesion, understanding each other's viewpoint and accepting them. And this will be leading to social harmony where there are no conflict and people find happiness and feeling of paradise on this earth. He didn't see paradise somewhere else. He wanted to have this whole concept of paradise here. What a novel and noble idea. I recommend all of you to listen to his lecture on YouTube. I spent a fair amount of time in learning about him on some of these things which I did not know. And read his book on Jainism too. I feel honored and proud to be associated with such an extraordinary but humble man. May Mahavir Bhagwan bless his soul and provide him an eternal peace. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shah. Well, you know, Dr. Shah brought out the many things that my dad was able to convey. And actually, he learned so much from all of you. And, you know, I think it would be so nice to be able to have all of you come up here and be able to share, you know, some of your conversations. And he would have wanted you to be acknowledged for that. But I know he would also not want this to go on as long as an Indian movie. So that's why we have to select just a handful of speakers. So Ms. Vibhuti then Patel, I would like to invite you now to come forward.
Hello everybody, I'm Jai Jinan. I feel privileged to be asked to say a few words about Vastupal Parikh, my adopted father. Like many brilliant people, he made lots of friends. He earned their respect with his knowledge, honesty, readiness to help, love of life, and sense of humor. A unique approach to Jain philosophy made him a favorite speaker at many Jain events, such as a Mahavir Jayanti and Parishad. In fact, he wrote a book about Jain philosophy and other one about the life of Mahavir. His simple way of explaining complex subjects made his books very readable. He was a member of many advisory committees charged with advising bureaucrats at all levels of government. However, he never stopped enjoying life's simple pleasures. At the age of 70, he used to climb a cherry tree in my backyard to pick cherries for me. When we went for GSSM camp, he would get up early in the morning to make toast for everyone by 7 a.m. He was everyone's favorite toast maker, and everybody was affectionately called him Toastmaster. He He played a versatile role in GSSM. GSSM is a Gujarati Senior Samaj of Mississauga. He was, that time was under Bharti Ben Karya's operation. At one point, he organized an exhibition of Gandhiji's life, including numerous pictures with historical details that were new to most of us. He wrote a stage play called Andhashraddha. I'm sure nobody would know that. And also starred in it, along with Nalini Ben. And not the least, he wrote the entire constitution of his beloved GSSM. When I visited him in Victoria, it was amazing to see him hard at work to complete his book despite his illness. But at the end of every day, he still wanted to play his favorite card game called Hero. He was always positive and cheerful, and he was very focused what he wanted to do. I noticed how Nalini Ben, putting her own needs aside, devoted all her time to him. It was touching to see the love and bond between this wonderful couple. As well, she was his academic partner. She supported the writing of his thesis and each of his 6 books as content and text editor. Finally, she fulfilled his wish to launch his last book. He was a dear friend of my late husband, Ajit. Vastupal Bhai loved nature. We used to go out for long walks, and in the fall, went to see the beautiful fall colors. To me, he was like a father and wise advisor. He was there when Ajit was sick and I needed a help and care 24/7. I miss him so much. It is huge loss in my life, and he will forever remain in my heart. This whole world needs more people like him. I'm sure he has left many, many happy memories for his Nallu, as well as for all of us. May his soul rest in peace. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bapuji Auntie. And now I understand why, when I visited my parents, I was always eating toast with cherry jam. So, you know, these are 2 of the stories that we've been able to share. I'd like to invite Bhadra Auntie to come up, Ms. Bhadra Kotari.
Chaitinendra, I'm glad, Nalini Ben, that you organized this memorial service so that we could all go back to our memory lane and pick up some pieces from those good memories. Thank you again. My introduction with Vastupal Bhai was maybe the longest one, because in 1993 we had an election in AGM in our Jain society. Sometimes it happens that nobody applied for a position, and there was a position for secretary and the president at that time. Obviously nominations were invited from the floor, and somebody from the back raised the hand and said, I would like to be secretary. Nobody knew him because he was new. It was 1993. I believe more or less that time they moved to Toronto, and that was their first meeting to come to Toronto maybe. And everybody looked at him, motion was passed, we selected him or appointed him as a secretary. In the same time, I was appointed as president of Jain Society of Toronto. Thus, me and Vastupal Parikh, we became teammates because we had to work very closely on so many issues at that time for our societies as well as other social things. Now that was the basic introduction with Vastupal Parikh. In 1995, after mid-1995-96, there was a kind of a revolution in Canadian society. And the revolution was everybody started realizing that Toronto is a multicultural, multi-faith society. And what we need is come closer to each other, start knowing each other, and be with each other so that we can live together with a lot of peace of mind. Unless until we know somebody, there is always a fear of unknown, and say, I don't know who they are, what they believe, what they think about me, and we will shy away from each other. And that time, the resolution was taken that let us have multi-faith dialogue, and dialogue that can bring everybody together. In that dialogue, Vastupal Parikh was in our society at the right moment, at the right time. We needed a person like him who can have a time, money, energy, interest, ability to go wherever the gatherings are, everything, because he came here in his retired life, in the beginning of retired life, so he was full of energy, full of enthusiasm, and that was a kind of cup of bright tea for him, the way I see it. We worked together in those meetings. All the organizations and all the congregations were looking for somebody to say about their religion, about their principles, about their ethics, about their rituals. And that time, Vastupal Parikh jumped into the wagon right there. He started preparing beautiful flyers, the handouts for everybody. So wherever we go in the meeting, he has some write-ups, some flyers, some handouts, and he is always prepared to talk about the Jainism. And more he started talking, more he started getting into the Jainism. And that was my experience with him. We worked together in the Society of Toronto. He was a member of our seniors club. He was a speaker in our seniors club. He was the guide when we were doing our study of Jain scriptures. Like our scriptures, in absence of Acharya and Guru and Sadhu Sadhvi, we don't have anybody to take the message to other people. But this type of members, they can devote their time and help us. So that way, in scripture study, as well as in seniors club, in going to interfaith gatherings, in hosting, and organizing all those meetings, he was a really, really, really helpful, and I can't forget his contribution to the society the way he did. 25 years of retirement life in Toronto, I believe for you, Nalini Ben, and Vastupal Parikh, I think that was very rewarding. I think one would wish to have that kind of last 25 years of their life doing the way you did it. I know that behind all his achievement You were the strength of a pillar, and that nobody can deny. Because if you don't get the support from your own house, you can't go too far. You know, that's the fact. So I'm sure that you also enjoyed being here. To me, honestly, this is your home. And doors are always open. Whenever you feel like to come from Victoria and stay with any of us. Thank you very much. Thanks again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Putrati. So we're just going to have one slight addition to today's program. I've been approached by one of my dad's friends, Mr. Sudhir Gandhi.
Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. We can talk about a lot of philosophy and what of things which has taught. But in real life, what we need to achieve, what he has achieved, that's how I'm going to give you one of his life example, what he told me personally. Okay. For Sri Ram, it is being said by one of the rishis, Vajrat api kathorani kusumavadapi komala. Vajra, like the strongest weapon, ena karta pan he was hardest. And kusum, ki je phool chhe, ena karta pan vadare komal hata. You know, to evo prasang ek emno se હું આપને સાથે બતાવવા માંગુ છું. When he was very sick, he had two problems. He had one with his heart and one with his lungs. And both lungs and heart, both needed to be operated or surgery, whatever medical science says. So surgeries were required. And none of the doctor would make the two surgery at the same time. Nobody was ready. And he was determined that no, I do not want to go through the same process two times. I want to go one time and it has to be done. With his Dr. Sagar's help or whatever, they had a conference with a lot of different doctors at one time. This might be about 20 years ago. And he convinced the team of the surgeons for the lungs and the heart that it will be done at the same time. You know, at the time when they were taking him to the operation room, all the doctors and nurses were nervous because they have never done this thing before. Now he is smiling, going down there. In operation theater, the doctor, he asked the doctors that, are you nervous? They said, yeah, we are nervous. Aren't you? Because for a simple operation, any patients get nervous. And he said, no. And he laughed. And he told them that in our philosophy, we believe that there is a rebirth. So doctors, you are the mechanic. This engine has a problem. If you cannot fix it, I'll get the new engine. And all the doctors and the nurses smiled. And this is what, at the time, in a practical thing, when we are at the same spot, because philosophically, anyone can talk who has studied the books. But in a real life, when it times comes for you, nobody has that patience which he had. And that is what we need to achieve in our life. And I remember him every day for this example. Now, he told me while we were going to one of the lectures in Niagara Falls, while coming back, he stopped by at my place because Nalini could not accompany him, and she was at her daughter's house. While coming back, somehow he forgot to plug his cell phone. Okay? So by the time we reached my home, his cell phone was dead. And he was he told me this story, and I was thinking, I still to date, I cannot find the answer. Because he could not call Nalini Ben, that hey, I'm here and I'm safe, I'm back at Sudhir Bhai's place, and he wanted to contact, and no phone. And I did not have her phone or his daughter's phone number. We looked at the directory and everything, could not find the thing. And he was so nervous, because he wanted to convey the message to them. So that is the thing I wanted to bring it out. Nalini Ben, he has got the new engine, nothing to worry about it. Thank you.
Thank you. That is a very special story, and especially about calming surgeons as they're about to start an operation. That was his style for sure. And maybe it was a nice segue to our final invited guest, who is a physician, Dr. Tushar Mehta.
Hello everyone, Jai Jinendra. So, I have, I guess, hundreds of memories of, spending time with Nalini Auntie and Vastupal Uncle and the rest of the family. And if you ask Uncle, he's always going to say things in a certain way, If you ask him if he has a lot of friends, he'll probably say, no, I don't have a lot of friends, but I have lots of family, And I think that's the way it was with him. Like he always felt like he always created, this whole idea of community and family. And when we're spending all these times and so many years together, you really feel that. And I think that's why everybody's here. Everybody feels like part of that family. And he always said to me that you're like my son too. And so I always felt like I had these three, older brothers and sisters. Like Sagar, Rita, and Margie. They were kind of, they're older than me, they're like more senior, and they're like always doing some important stuff around the world. These big siblings you never get to see. When you get to see them, you're like kind of excited, like, wow, my sibling is here, what are they doing now? It's amazing. And he'd probably say something like that, So he's always laughing, energized, brilliant, feisty. We've heard so many stories about that. And, we had hundreds of hours of, not hundreds, but many, many hours of discussion about Jainism. And one thing you know about him, right? If he's telling a story, all these guys are talking about stories. If he has a story, that story's going to grow and it's going to become a long story. We all know that, right? And that was the nice thing about him. And he had so many of those long stories. Sometimes I would come home and my parents would criticize me because, I'm working long hours. And then I'll go out and I'll come home really late anyways. Even though I've been working so many hours, I haven't slept that much, I'll come home at 1 o'clock. And I think I'm gonna come home at 1 a.m., which is actually not too bad for me. I'm gonna sneak into the house so my parents don't know that I'm coming in so late. And then I get home, and all these like 1 a.m., 1:30 a.m., and they're all playing cards in our living room. They're all playing cards, laughing, and I'm like, whoa. And they're all like 70 and 80 years old. Yeah. And Uncle and Auntie, you sold me my first car for, I think, $100 or $200, right? And it was the same car that I think Sagar, Madhuri, and Rita drove at one point, that little blue Firefly 3-cylinder car. And when I got that car spent about 50% of the time getting repaired, and 50% of the time I was driving it. But actually, I loved that car. And I learned a lot about fixing cars, and we had a lot of good times, and I would always remember these guys actually when I'm driving, and I'm like, wow, this is the car that these guys are always driving around before. And that was good. And there's one good memory that sort of stands out. I always think of this memory about when it comes to Uncle and Auntie, So one time I was told it's Uncle's birthday, right? And so we're gonna have a surprise party for Uncle. So you have to be here at this time. Don't mess it up, because I have a tendency to be late a lot of times. And so, great, it's at Lisa Street, their condo, and I drive to the condo, and it's a surprise party, right? And so I get into the parking lot, get out of my car, and all of a sudden I see Uncle's like wandering around in the garden, and I'm like, oh shit, and have to hide. He shouldn't know that I'm here, And then I'm thinking, like, how can I sneak into the front or in the back? you know, and Uncle's like wandering out, you know what I mean, like that. And somehow, even though I'm hiding, he wanders right towards me. So then I'm thinking, okay, I can't hide because if I'm hiding, it's gonna look very suspicious, right? So then I have to pretend that I'm not hiding, and I'm like, hey, you know, I'm just like pretending like nothing's happening, and oh, Uncle, hey, how you doing? What's going on? And he's like, Tushar, why are you here? And I'm like, that's a good question. What do I say? You know? So I start up making up some stupid lie. I don't know how it was that I was there, you know, like, you know, I can't say that my parents are here or something like this, you know, or that I'm coming to them visit upstairs. I don't know what I was saying, but I was like very nervous, you know. And he's like, Tushar, you know, come around the back. I want to show you something. And so he brings me around the back, and I'm sweating now because I'm thinking like, man, I'm gonna ruin this surprise party for him. This is supposed to be a surprise, you know. People, when we go upstairs, then everybody goes surprise. I'm gonna be standing beside him. I'm gonna be like a loser. So he brings me around to the back of the building and through the door and into a room, and everybody goes surprise. And it was like, he actually fooled me. It was a trick that Auntie and Uncle played on me that was actually a surprise for my graduation from medical school. So I was actually the one who was right. And that was a really good trick. It was really smart. And I was so shocked, and I was like sweating. It was quite something. Yeah. But anyways, there were so many good times. And as Uncle was saying, you know, Vastupal Uncle's got a new car somewhere out there. He's probably causing trouble, and some good kind of trouble. And you know, I think the main thing though is that he always really valued family, community, and the integration of intellectual ideals with, you know, world issues and community issues on the small scale and the big scale, and wanted to see everybody as a family, you know. And so hopefully we all stay as a family, and we continue to have these good memories together and connect to these kind of values that Uncle loved so much. And do good things for each other and do good things for the world, and I know that's what Uncle wants.
Thanks, Tushar, and we'll continue on that family theme with Rita.
So, well, my dad was diagnosed with brain cancer just over a year ago. He had been sick for a very long time. And in looking back in retrospect, the signs were there. I think we recognized that something wasn't quite right, at least a decade ago. My dad started to just get angry. He got angry very quickly. His fuse was very, very short. He became impatient. He became somewhat cynical. And he would sometimes say to us, "You're hopeless. There's no hope." And he would get angry with a store clerk or a physician's assistant or with me or my kids or with my mom. And we all responded to it in different ways. And I think for me, I got very upset and I got very angry. Because I couldn't really square it with the person that you've heard about today. All the good actions, all the wonderful words, all the generosity, all of the good writing. It was as if they were two different people. About 2 months before he died, he was out for a walk in Victoria with my mom. He'd already lost his eyesight in one eye, couldn't hear anything. And the cancer had weakened him, and he was leaning on my mom's arm. And in front of them, half a block away, there was another older man pushing a walker. And as the walker left the sidewalk and the man tumbled after it, my dad pushed my mom's arm away, and he ran to him, as any of us would have done, to help this man out. What he did though, before he set the walker back on the sidewalk, and before he helped the man back onto his feet, he grabbed him and he embraced him, and he held him close, heart to heart, And he put the man's shoulder on his shoulder, head on his shoulder. And I think that's my dad, deeply, deeply empathetic, like my son. And I don't know what he said to this man, but I imagine it's what he expressed to all of us, which is, I've got you. You're okay. I'll do anything for you, and you're safe.
Thank you, Rita. And now we'll have Margie. You want to just come up right now?
I'm not prepared, but spontaneously I felt I need to a couple of things I want to say. I am Nalini Ben's cousin, and I'm Vastupal Parikh's younger sister. My family and his family were close friends, and he was very close brother. He was close to my brother. Vastupal Bhai always we admired. I was in that picture, the wedding picture you saw. I was like, if you see that one, I was there. Vastupal Bhai, he was inspiration. He was the first one to come to Canada. He inspired everybody to come and join. I used his first book, Chemistry. I was in the second year of my college, and he published the book that time, and I was the first one to use it. So these are my personal things I wanted to share with you. I promoted his book that time to my friends. Later on, after years, I came to United States, and my family always says, Nalini is there for you, and she will be guide to you, and that was happened throughout the years. I knew him as a professor of chemistry, but then after his retirement, I saw him change for Jainism. I know we all never knew what was Jainism, and he's the one who was really inspired to look at what is real Jainism. And since then, I've been also really learning about true Jainism. Another thing I wanted, he was really a family man. I know in all this talk, anybody brought to them. He determined, in spite of his serious illness, to go back and visit all his family. That was really a courageous thing. And I had spoken to him, is that okay to go? And I kept on talking to my sister back home in India. Is Vastupal okay there? And in spite of all the struggle, he made it. You can see his determination, his courage, and I don't think he's gone. For me, he's not gone. His inspiration, his courage is always going to be with me and with all of us. Thank you.
You know, I'm Bharti's husband, and I don't want to continue the Indian movie, so I'll just take 2 minutes. So, first time I met, when Sagar was in Andover High School, and two of us became the guardian for Sagar. And that continued when Sagar decided to get into Columbia. So still we were the guardian. But Sagar knew more than all of us. I was the first one. One day he calls me. By the way, I'm a cardiologist. So one day he calls me and he said that I can't walk more than a half a block. And he got an appointment here in Canada 8 months later. So I told him, I said, come on over, I'll take care of it. That's when we found out he has a serious heart problem. So he came to my office, we did the stress test. He could hardly walk for a minute, and turned out to be very strongly positive, and that's when we decided that he needs to go for the thing. So he already mentioned what happened. Thank God that he went for the surgery, and with the lung cancer that was taken out, that wasn't the killer. You know, it was something else. Another thing that he was a professor of chemistry, Bharti said, we all used this book in chemistry when I was in inter-science. It was Parikh and Parikh, the practical book in chemistry. That's what we used. Never realized when I was in inter-science that I'm going to meet the author. And that too, that came back to be very close to our life, me and Bharti. He retired, but you know, the guy was so smart, so dedicated, that about 30 years ago, 30, 40 years ago, he came up with the idea to put it in the mall, the video conferencing room. Now, you have it in iPhone now. But he was the one who came up with that idea. He was so dedicated that because he didn't know about Jainism, he took 1 year off, visited all over India, talked to all the quote-unquote, all those pandits and gurus, and came up with the book, especially interesting to young generation. Because nowadays, when we were growing up, you're not supposed to ask any question. But young generation, they will ask, why? Why? So, that was the reason he wrote that book, and he spent a whole year. Last time I talked to him, I called him, I forgot there was a 3-hour time difference. So he picks up the phone. So I said, can I talk to Nalini? He said, everybody is sleeping, I'm the only one, so you have to talk to me. So all those memories, they are still here, and we have lost one wonderful, wonderful person that comes in this world once in a while. And Nalini Ben, and you guys, Sagar, Rita, and Margie, and all of you, new generation, you are lucky to have access to your Bapuji, your father, and your soulmate. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Arun and Bharti. I promised to pay you back that loan that I took for college that I owe you. All right, Margie.
Thanks. We're almost done. So about maybe last August or September, I came home from a trip. It was just a couple days, maybe 3 days and 2 nights. And as was the practice at the time, I came first to Mom and Dad's place before going to my own home. And I called up from the intercom saying, I'm coming up, and the elevator opens and there's Dad. And he says, you'll never know. I'm tired and cranky, you know. What, Dad? And he just smiles and he says, you'll never know. And I drag my suitcase to the door, and we go in the door, and you'll never know how much I missed you. And maybe I was a little annoyed at the time because it was a pretty intense year, and I reflected, a year and a half, I reflected back on the things that we did, and although they're on a post-it here, this is a very abbreviated list. So in the last year and a half, we convinced Mom and Dad to sell the condo and leave all their beautiful friends here in Brampton. Prepared the condo for sale, sold the condo, packed and packed and packed. There are a lot of books. Bought a condo in Victoria, completely renovated that condo, and then welcome Mom and Dad to Victoria. I hadn't anticipated how moving from Brampton to Victoria was actually more than just a move. It was the loss also of deep, long friendships. So it's really nice that we can be here today and to see these faces and remember some of those times. So they quickly settled into Victoria. They took every opportunity to walk down the street and go to all the festivals. And 5 weeks later, Dad had his diagnosis of this brain tumor. So he lost the eye, again, adapting to the loss of that eye, using it to his advantage when he was playing cards. Oh, but I only have one eye, you know. Then there was the concrete diagnosis, there was the many trips to the hospital, to the neurosurgeons, radiation, and of course he finished his manuscript, so that was very intense. And we saw the picture of Mom's 5K race in Toronto, but last October, both Mom and Dad did a 5K in Victoria. So that was another accomplishment. Then there was a family reunion for 35 people in Victoria. There was a 1-month-long trip to India. There was the book launch, getting the book actually in our hands, and a day before he died, his 63rd wedding anniversary. So it was a very, very intense year. And, you know, Mom says sometimes, she keeps saying thank you. And it's like, I think we all feel really lucky that we had that time. And it was very intense, but it was a very special time for us, special time, you know, certainly for the rest of the family. And I think Sage is the only grandchild that's really still in Victoria, a very special bond. So to those of you who are grandparents, I will say, hold your grandchildren close. And it really is a very important connection. And so it was intense. I feel very lucky. And so the only thing I'll say is, Dad, you'll never know.
Thank you, Margie. So we're down to our final 2 events for the afternoon. We're going to have a solemn moment and then a joyous moment. We're going to have some prayers and some explanation for those of us who don't understand the Indian language or the meaning of those prayers. And then we're going to close with a very upbeat family song. So at this point, I'd like to invite Dr. Kirti Shah to tell us a little bit about the prayer and lead us in that.
Thank you, Raga. Well, I had the good fortune of knowing Vastupal Parikh for close to 20 years. First, he and the Nalini visited us with Ashok Shah, who introduced us to him. And after we moved to Toronto, he was one of our closest friends. We'll never forget the 1 week we spent with him in Victoria, pretty close to his last days. We had the good fortune of being there at the time of the book launch. We had a very memorable 1 week in Victoria with Nalini and Vastupal. Now about the prayer. In Jain tradition, Navasmaran is a very special place. Navasmaran is invariably spoken or listened to on the New Year Day, and some of these, at least 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of these are part of Katikaman, Papi, Samvatsari and Chaumasi Katikaman. Now, even within the Navasmaran, by the way, the first 6 are in Prakrit, the last 3 are in Sanskrit. Bhaktam and Kalyan Mandir, apart from everything, are beautiful examples of Sanskrit poetry. Just for the literature point of view, they are excellent poetical compositions. Finally, Lohat Shanti, Moti Shanti as we call it, is a stotra which is invariably spoken on all auspicious occasions as well as on prayer meetings like this. So with that short introduction to Moti Shanti or Brihut Shanti, we will start now. Namo Rihantanam, Namo Siddhanam, Namo Ayuryanam, Namo Uvajjayanam, Namo Loe Sabba Sadhunam, Eso Panchanamukaro Sabba Bhava Panasano, Mangalanam Sabvesim, Padamam Havai Mangalam. Bhogo Bhavya Shrunutta Vachanam, Prastutam Sargameta Yeyakrayam, Vibhuvana Guru Radhata Bhakti Vaja. Tesham Shanti Bhavatu Bhavata Malhada Dipta Bhavada Rogya Shri Dutimati Kari Klesha Vidvamsa Hetu Bhogo Bhavilokaha Idhi Vatairavata Videha Sambhavanam Samasta Tirthakrutam Janmo Nyasana Pakampanam Dharmaudina Vignaya Todharmadipati Shubhosha Ganta Chalan Anantam Sakasra Sindhi Saha Samagatya Savinayam Bhat Pettadakam Duitva Gatpa Kanakadishunke Vihita Janma Vishekaha Shantim Udghoshayati Yatha Tatoham Tutanu Kalpiti Kutva Mahajano Yena Gataha Sapantaha Iti Bhavajanai Sa Samagatya Snata Pite Snatam Vidhaya Shantim Udghoshayami Tat Puja Yatra Snatadi Matsvananta Miti Kutva Karnam Tattva Nishmetam Swaha Om Punyaham Punyaham Priyantam Priyantam Bhagwanto Sarvajnaha Sarvadashina Stilokanatha Stilokamahita Stilok Puja Stilokeshwara Stiloko Devatakaraha Om Dushaba Ajita Sambhav Abhinandana Sumati Padma Tapa Sopashva Chanda Tapa Suvidhi Shitala Shriyansa Vasu Puja Vimala Ananta Dharma Shanti Kuntwaramalli Muniswata Nami Nami Vardhamananta Jinaha Shantaha Shantikara Bhavantu Swaha Om Muneo Muniprava Ripuje Durbhiksha Kankareshu Durga Mageshu Rakshantu Nityam Swaha Om Dim Shim Duti Mati Kirti Kanti Buddhi Lakshmi Meda Vidya Sadhana Pavesh Niveshwareshu Sughrita Namano Jayante Jinendraha Om Rohini Pratyapti Vajashankla Vajram Kusi Aprati Chakra Purush Tatta Kali Kali Gauri Gandhari Sadastama Jvala Manvi Vairutya Achupta Mansi Mansi Shorts Vidya Divyu Rakshantu Nityam Swaha Om Acharyo Padya Pratyuti Chatur Manas Shri Samasangasya Shanti Bhavatu Tushti Bhavatu Tushti Bhavatu Om Grahas Chandra Suryangalpa Buddha Brihaspati Shukra Shanishchara Rahu Ketu Saitaha Saloka Palaha Soma Yama Varuna Kubira Skanda Vinaya Kopeta Echanyati Gram Nagar Kshetra Devata Desti Sabe Priyantam Priyantam Akshya Pushkoshthagara Narpate Aksya Bhavantu Swaha Om Putra Mitra Bhatu Kalatra Surada Sajana Sabandi Bandhuvat Saitaha Nityam Chamoda Pramoda Kalina Ashmischa Bhuvandalayatana Nivasi Sadhu Sadhu Shavak Sharekanam Rupopsarthvari Duk Tudit Dhamma Shrashanaya Shanti Bhavatu Om Tushti Pushti Dudi Dudi Mangalya Swaha Sada Pradar Bhutani Papani Shamintu Duditani Shattava Palang Mukha Bhavantu Swaha Om Srimate Shanti Nathaya Namah Shanti Vidayine Trailokya Shyamadadisha Mukadabhya Chitandaye Shanti Shanti Kalashi Man Shantim Desatu Me Guru Shanti Deva Sadate Sham Yesham Shanti Duhe Guhe Undushta Dishta Dushta Bhugdati Duswapna Dunimittadi Sampadita Yusapan Namaganam Jayanti Sante Shri Sangha Jagat Janapada Rajani Paraj Sanniveshanam Gauschita Puru Mukhyanam Vyare Vyare Chantim Shri Shamana Sangasya Shanti Bhavatu Shri Janapadanam Shanti Bhavatu Shri Rajadipanam Shanti Bhavatu Shri Rajasanniveshanam Shanti Bhavatu Shri Goshtikanam Shanti Bhavatu Shri Paura Mukhyanam Shanti Bhavatu Shri Paura Janasya Shanti Bhavatu Shri Brahma Lokasya Shanti Bhavatu Om Swaha Om Swaha Om Shri Parshvanathaya Swaha Esha Shanti Pratisthayatra Snaptatya Vasaneshu Shanti Kalasam Dhutva Kunkuma Chandana Kalpuragal Dhupavasa Kuskumanjali Sametaha Shnatra Chatushki Kayam Shri Sangas Sametaha Shuchi Shuchi Vapu Pushpavasta Chandana Varnalam Kita Pushpamalam Kanchi Kutva Shanti Mudghoshayitva Shanti Panyam Mastake Ratavjamiti Nutyanti Nutyam Manipushpavarsham Shujanti Gayanti Chamangalani स्तुतानि गुप्तानि पठन्तु मन्त्रान् कल्याणभाजो हि जनाभिषेके शिवमस्तु सर्वजगतः परहितनिरताः भवन्तु भूतगणाः दोषाः प्रयान्तु नाशं सर्वत्र सुखी भवन्तु लोकाः अहं पित्तमाया शिवादेवी तुम्नय निवासिनी अम्म शिवं तुम शिवं अशिवोऽस्मं शिवं भवन्तु स्वाहा उपसदाक्षयं यान्ति छिद्यन्ते विघ्नवल्लयो मनः प्रसन्नतामेति पूज्यमाने जिनेश्वरे सर्वमङ्गलमाङ्गल्यं सर्वकल्याणकारणं प्रधानं सर्वधर्माणां जयनं जयति शासनं नमो नियन्तानं नमो सिद्धानं नमो आयर्यानं नमो वज्रायनं नमो लोये सपसावनं ईश्वो वञ्चनमुक्तारो सपपापप्रणाशनो मङ्गलानि च सर्वेसिं परमं भवे मङ्गलम्.
Thank you very much for that moving prayer. So, and is our rock and roll band ready to go? We are on the last part of our show. We're just going to invite our musicians to get on their guitars, and you can sing along. The words are a little bit small print, but those of you who are closer, you'll be able to read that.
All right, this is it. It's been a long, interesting journey. One might say a legendary journey when you think about Dad. And one of the things I can say about him, after knowing him for 30 years now, is that he had a sense of humor and a great sense of fun, and he really loved when the grandchildren would come by. And the grandkids would get so excited about this. One of the things that inspired this song was just remembering Sage in particular. Whenever he would go visit, he would start screaming, "Ba Bapuji, Ba Bapuji, Ba Bapuji," and he'd run around in circles. And even when he wasn't there, it would be kind of a family lore that Sage in particular would sing Ba Bapuji. And so this song is the Ba Bapuji Rock. And it's audience participation in the chorus section, and we'll give you a little bit of a sense of what that is. But we need at least the grandchildren to come on up here and be kind of like the cheerleaders. And so come on up, let's go. Anjali, Nina, Shalini, let's go. Come on up here. And I don't know, Margie, Rita, you want to come on up? And whoever, Peter, whoever? To help with the chorus. And Jay's gonna hold the mic, but anyways, you can join along. It's hard to see, but we're gonna sing 2 verses that Jay and I will sing. And then we're going to do a bridge. And of course, Tushar's up here to help out with the guitar as well. And then we're gonna sing the chorus, which goes like this. Ba Bapuji, Ba Bapuji rock, Ba Bapuji, Ba Bapuji rock. They rock right on through it. That's the audience participation part. So that's when you can chime in and say Ba Bapuji, Ba Bapuji rock. And so we're gonna practice that now once before we actually get into the song, and we're gonna see how well you do. So I'll give you a count in. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Ba Bapuji, Ba Bapuji rock. Ba Bapuji, Ba Bapuji rock. They rock right on through it again. Ba Bapuji, Ba Bapuji rock, Ba Bapuji, Ba Bapuji rock. They rock right on through it. They rock right on through, right on through. So that's the chorus part, and you're invited to participate. And I'm sure that Bapuji would be smiling. I think he was always actually beating his fingers and rhythms and things like that. And actually, we learned how to play the tabla once simultaneously, but we were on different sides of the continent. But anyways, that's another story. So here we go. Are you guys ready? And perhaps you heard about this legendary family who came from far and far away a long, long time ago. And at the helm there was this legendary chemist who dreamt a legendary dream of landscapes filled with snow. Whoa, 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 whoa. Up in the snow.
By his side there rode a legendary woman, and 3 fine kids they raised up in their snowy Nelson home. And pretty soon from far and wide across the nations, yeah, their good works did unfold in splendor multiplied threefold. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Up in the snow.
And even when the times got tough, this family struck right on through it.
And even when the going was rough,
they knew that they could just count on these two. Through it all, through it all. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Bapuji, Bapuji rock, Bapuji, Bapuji rock. They rocked right on through it. Bapuji, Bapuji rock, Bapuji, Bapuji rock. They rocked right on through it. They rocked right on through, right on through.
Perhaps you heard about this legendary family who came from far, far away a long, long time ago.
And at the helm there was this legendary chemist who dreamt a legendary dream of landscapes filled with snow. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Up in the snow. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Up in the snow. 1, 2, 3, 4. Bapuji, Bapuji rock, Bapuji, Bapuji rock. They rock right on through it. Bapuji, Bapuji rock, Bapuji, Bapuji rock. They rock right on through it.
One more time, everyone.
Bapuji, Bapuji rock, Bapuji, Bapuji rock. They rock right on through it. They rock right on through, right on through.
It's true.
All right. So with that, please join us for some refreshments. Thank you.
Yeah.